JUNGKOOK collapses on live television after Taehyung says something no one expected him to say out loud. What happened next wasn't just a broadcast incident. It was the emotional breaking point of a story that had been quietly unraveling for over a year. "Don't pretend you ever loved me," Taehyung said, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the studio air. "Just tell the truth, right here, right now." The moment the words left his mouth, the atmosphere shifted. The studio froze. The audience inhaled sharply, the sound rippling through the room like a wave. Cameras zoomed in automatically, lights glaring down with unforgiving intensity. No one moved. No one spoke. Jungkook's expression changed first. His lips parted as if he wanted to respond, but no sound came out. His knees buckled before his mind could catch up. His body crumpled to the floor in a silent collapse, the microphone still clipped to his collar as the impact knocked the breath from his lungs. It wasn't just the fall that broke him. It was the sentence that came before it. The broadcast didn't cut. Millions across Korea and soon across the world watched in real time as Jungkook, the idol known for strength and composure, lay motionless under the studio lights. Tears streaked down his face, cutting through the carefully applied makeup. A staff member screamed off camera. One of the hosts rushed forward, waving frantically for help that didn't seem to come fast enough. Taehyung didn't move. His jaw was clenched so tightly it looked painful. The words he had spoken echoed relentlessly in his head. Just tell the truth. But the truth had never been simple, and Jungkook's collapse wasn't just physical. It was the result of months of buried emotions clawing their way to the surface all at once. This wasn't supposed to happen. The segment had been planned as a light-hearted reunion, a celebration. Two members reunited after a year of separate schedules, solo projects, rumors that had never quite died down. Producers knew the pairing would spike ratings. They hadn't anticipated a live emotional implosion. Jungkook hadn't slept the night before the broadcast. He hadn't even wanted to come. That morning, he stood in front of the mirror in the dressing room, hands trembling as he stared at his reflection. Something about his own face felt unfamiliar, like he was looking at someone who had learned how to smile without feeling anything behind it. His stylist noticed immediately, the faint redness in his eyes, the way his fingers kept tugging at the hem of his sleeve, the way his laughter sounded a little too perfect, every movement carefully measured. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked softly, adjusting a strand of hair near his forehead. Jungkook nodded, practiced and automatic. "It's just a show." But it hadn't been just a show for Taehyung. Not after what Jungkook had written. Not after what Taehyung had seen the night everything quietly fell apart a year ago. Not after the unanswered messages, the voice notes left unread, the letters that were never acknowledged. Jungkook had disappeared from his life so completely it felt like he'd been erased. What Taehyung said on stage wasn't planned. It wasn't scripted. It broke out of him like a dam finally giving way. The moment Jungkook walked onto the set, Taehyung saw it in his eyes. That distance. That look that said they were strangers now, standing under 1,000 blinking lights for an audience desperate for closure. "You lied to me," Taehyung continued, his voice trembling just before Jungkook collapsed. "You looked me in the eye and said you'd wait, and you didn't." Most viewers assumed it was a dramatic misstep, a mistake in the script, performance tension taken too far, but no one had written this. As paramedics rushed in and carefully lifted Jungkook onto a stretcher, the broadcast finally cut. The screen faded to black. "Technical difficulties, please stand by." Backstage, nothing was technical, nothing was controlled. Namjoon burst into the green room, his phone vibrating non-stop in his hand. "What happened?" he demanded, eyes blazing. "Why didn't anyone stop that segment?" No one knew he would say that, the producer stammered, face drained of color. "We thought they were fine." "They haven't spoken in 11 months, Namjoon snapped, grabbing the producer by the collar. "You ambushed them for ratings." Meanwhile, in the hallway outside the ambulance bay, Taehyung stood alone. His gaze was fixed on the blood pressure cuff still wrapped around JUNGKOOK's arm. He hadn't cried. Not yet. The anger that had driven his words on stage was already dissolving into something heavier. Regret. Confusion. A memory he couldn't push away. The last time they touched, JUNGKOOK had leaned against his shoulder by the Han River. No conversation. No explanations. Just silence heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. And then JUNGKOOK was gone. Now he lay unconscious in a hospital room, pale beneath white lights. He looked peaceful. Taehyung knew better. The collapse wasn't over. The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and cold air. Machines hummed softly behind closed doors, their steady rhythms mocking the chaos that had erupted only an hour earlier on live television. Taehyung stood just outside JUNGKOOK's room, hands clenched into fists at his sides, his silhouette frozen beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. "You shouldn't be here." The nurse's words landed like a slap. She crossed her arms, blocking the doorway with quiet authority. "He's stable," she continued, her voice clipped. "Physically, but emotionally, God knows what damage you've done." "I didn't mean for him to collapse," Taehyung murmured, his voice strained. "I didn't mean for any of this." "Intent doesn't erase consequence," she replied coolly before stepping past him. Taehyung took a breath and stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing him into the room with the guilt that had been clawing up his spine since the moment JUNGKOOK fell. The air felt too cold, or maybe it was just the weight of everything he hadn't said until it was too late. JUNGKOOK lay motionless on the bed, wires tracing his chest, a slow, steady beep echoing through the room. Even unconscious, his expression looked tense, haunted, like his body hadn't forgotten the pain that put him there. Taehyung dragged a chair closer and sat. He stared at JUNGKOOK's face, memorizing it all over again, as if afraid it might disappear if he looked away. "You lied to me too," Taehyung whispered bitterly. "You acted like nothing mattered, like we didn't matter, and now I'm the villain." He reached out instinctively, then stopped just short of touching JUNGKOOK's hand, pulling back as if the contact would burn. The door opened softly. Namjoon stepped inside, his expression dark and unreadable. He took in the scene in silence before turning his gaze to Taehyung. "You went too far," Namjoon said quietly. Taehyung didn't look up. "He left me without a word." "That doesn't give you the right to break him in front of the world," Namjoon replied, his voice tight. "Do you have any idea what's happening outside? Fans are crying in the lobby. Reporters are circling the building. Social media's already tearing both of you apart." "Let them," Taehyung said hollowly. "Let the world burn." "You will care," Namjoon snapped. "Because if you don't fix this, they'll decide the ending for you." Before Taehyung could respond, a faint movement caught his eye. JUNGKOOK stirred. His lashes fluttered, his brows knitting together as if he were waking from a nightmare he couldn't escape. A soft sound escaped his lips, barely audible. "Taehyung." Taehyung was on his feet instantly, knees nearly buckling as he leaned over the bed. "I'm here," he breathed. "I'm right here." JUNGKOOK blinked slowly, confusion clouding his gaze before recognition set in. Fear followed, then pain. "Why?" JUNGKOOK whispered, his voice dry and cracked. "Why did you say it like that?" Taehyung swallowed hard. "I didn't plan to. I was angry. I thought you hated me." "I was trying to protect you," JUNGKOOK rasped. "From what?" Taehyung asked, his voice breaking. "From me, from the truth." JUNGKOOK's eyes locked onto his. "From myself. I was dying inside. Every day after I left, I couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe, but I knew if I stayed, I'd ruin you. You were rising so fast, and I felt like the weight pulling you down." "You were never a weight," Taehyung said fiercely. "You were my anchor." Tears welled in JUNGKOOK's eyes. "Then why did you cut the rope?" The question hung between them, heavy and unanswered. Namjoon stepped back quietly, giving them space neither of them had allowed themselves in months. The machines continued their steady rhythm, indifferent to the fragile truth unraveling in the room. I didn't know how to live with losing you, Taehyung admitted, his voice trembling. I thought if I said it out loud, if I made you feel even a fraction of what I felt, maybe I could breathe again. JUNGKOOK turned his head away, a tear slipping down the curve of his cheek. Congratulations, he whispered. I felt everything, and it broke me. Silence settled again, thicker this time. Not sharp like before, but heavy, pressing in from all sides. Outside the room, security guards had already taken their positions. Reporters gathered in the parking lot, shouting questions no one was answering. JUNGKOOK's name trended worldwide, but not for a comeback or a performance. For collapsing on national television after Taehyung's shocking confession shattered the image everyone thought they understood. Inside, Taehyung hadn't moved from the chair. He hadn't slept. The dark circles under his eyes weren't from exhaustion alone. They were from replaying the moment JUNGKOOK fell over and over like a punishment he couldn't escape. JUNGKOOK lay propped against pillows now, awake but distant. His fingers kept clenching and unclenching the blanket, as if testing whether he was still real. Say something, Taehyung whispered. Yell at me, hate me, I deserve it. JUNGKOOK finally turned to him. When he spoke, his voice was sharp enough to cut through bone. You think this is silence, he said. This is survival. Taehyung looked away, jaw tight. I didn't go on that show to fight with you, JUNGKOOK continued. I told my team I wasn't ready. They said the fans needed closure. They said you'd be calm, safe. I wasn't safe either, Taehyung said quietly. I was drowning. You left me in the dark with nothing. JUNGKOOK let out a bitter laugh. So you set the whole stage on fire just to make sure I could see how much it hurt. Taehyung slammed his fist into the arm of the chair. You vanished. One day we were together and the next it was I need time, and then nothing. No goodbye, no explanation. I didn't want you to see me like that, JUNGKOOK shot back. I was spiraling. I was erasing myself piece by piece. I would have drowned with you, Taehyung whispered. That silenced JUNGKOOK. A long, heavy pause stretched between them, filled with everything they had never dared to say. Finally, JUNGKOOK spoke again, his voice softer, exhausted. I don't know what's worse, he said. The silence between us or the noise we created outside. Taehyung leaned forward, rubbing his face with trembling hands. I can't unsay it, but I can say everything I didn't. JUNGKOOK met his gaze. Like what? That I loved you, Taehyung said, his voice shaking. That I still do, and that I said what I did because you broke my heart first and I didn't know how to survive it. JUNGKOOK looked away, tears slipping free. Then you should have told me sooner. The door opened quietly and Namjoon returned, his expression grave. You both need to hear this, he said. The footage is everywhere. Some people think it was scripted. Others are calling it emotional abuse. Sponsors are panicking. Contracts are on hold. Taehyung didn't flinch. Let them go. You can't be serious, the manager behind Namjoon hissed. You're risking everything. I already ruined his heart, Taehyung replied. What's left to lose? Namjoon's voice dropped. You need to figure this out, not for the media, for yourselves. JUNGKOOK pushed himself up slightly, fire flickering behind his exhaustion. Then let's stop pretending, he said. Let's tell the truth, all of it. The room went still. One interview, JUNGKOOK continued. Just us, live, no script, no lies. Taehyung's breath caught, then he nodded slowly. No more running, he said. In that moment, they weren't idols. They weren't symbols or headlines. They were two broken men standing at the edge of a storm they had finally decided to face. And the world was watching, whether they were ready or not. The studio was nothing like before. There were no flashing lights, no cheering audience, no playful hosts guiding the conversation. The space was stripped bare, almost clinical. Two chairs faced each other on a black stage, surrounded by darkness. A single spotlight hovered above each seat, leaving no place to hide, no shadows to retreat into. This wasn't entertainment, this was exposure. Taehyung arrived first. He wore black from head to toe, his face bare of makeup, sharp and hollow at the same time. His posture was calm, but his heartbeat was anything but. Every step toward the chair felt like walking into a reckoning he had delayed for too long. 2 minutes later, JUNGKOOK walked in. He looked thinner, paler. A muted gray sweater hung loosely on his frame, emphasizing the vulnerability he no longer bothered to disguise. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but his gaze was steady. When their eyes met, neither of them smiled. Neither of them looked away. The producer whispered softly from off camera, "3, 2, 1, we're live." The host's voice came from the darkness, calm and deliberate. She wasn't visible. She wouldn't be. This wasn't about her. Kim Taehyung, JUNGKOOK. The world watched what happened on live television. Tonight there is no script. The floor is yours. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence was unbearable. Then Taehyung leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. His voice, when it came, was low and unsteady. "I don't know how to start this without lying." "Then don't," JUNGKOOK replied, his tone flat. Taehyung exhaled shakily. "I was angry, I was devastated, I felt abandoned. I thought you gave up on us." "I didn't give up," JUNGKOOK said immediately. "I was trying to survive." "You left without a word," Taehyung shot back, "and you let me believe I meant nothing." "And you humiliated me in front of millions," JUNGKOOK said, his voice tightening. "You cornered me. You broke me where I couldn't escape." Taehyung sat back, his jaw clenched. "Because I didn't know how to grieve you while you were still alive." The words landed heavily. JUNGKOOK's hands trembled in his lap, but his voice stayed level. "You wanted the world to think I was the villain, that I walked away because I didn't care." "You did walk away," Taehyung snapped. "You left me choking on unanswered questions." "I was breaking," JUNGKOOK said sharply. "I couldn't even recognize myself anymore." Then he said the thing no one expected. "I thought about ending everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Taehyung froze. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Across the world, viewers leaned closer to their screens, breath caught in their throats. "I didn't tell anyone," JUNGKOOK continued, quieter now, "because I knew what it would do to you. You were soaring. Your solo career was exploding. I didn't want to drag you into my storm." "I wanted to be in your storm," Taehyung whispered, eyes filling with tears. "I didn't care about charts, I cared about you." "Then why did you weaponize your pain?" JUNGKOOK asked. "Why did you turn my silence into something meant to hurt me?" Taehyung stood abruptly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. "Because I was jealous," he admitted. "Of your silence, of the way you could walk away while I was stuck. I hated you for it, and I hated myself even more for still loving you." The host's voice cut in gently. "There's a rumor that the bond between you was more than friendship." The question hovered like a live wire. JUNGKOOK looked at Taehyung. Hesitation flickered across his face. Taehyung didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said, "it was." A collective gasp rippled through the unseen audience at home. "We weren't just bandmates," Taehyung continued. "We were in love, the kind that changes the way you breathe." The internet erupted instantly. Hashtags ignited. Newsrooms scrambled. The moment fractured the industry's carefully maintained silence. The host turned to JUNGKOOK. "And you?" JUNGKOOK closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "I loved him more than I ever loved myself." "Then why did it end?" the host asked softly. "Because love wasn't enough to save me from myself," JUNGKOOK replied. "I didn't know how to hold him without first believing I was worth holding, and I was." Taehyung stepped closer, his voice breaking. "You were always enough." "And yet," JUNGKOOK said quietly, "you broke me in front of the world." Taehyung bowed his head. I'm sorry. So am I, JUNGKOOK replied. They stayed there, suspended between pain and forgiveness, not healed but finally honest. The host ended the segment without flourish. This wasn't an interview, it was the truth, thank you. The cameras shut off. The silence afterward felt louder than the broadcast itself. Backstage was chaos. Managers whispered urgently. Phones rang nonstop. Sponsors threatened to pull out. Staff members moved carefully, unsure whether to comfort or retreat. Taehyung leaned against the wall outside the dressing room, his hands shaking despite his efforts to stay composed. JUNGKOOK stepped inside a moment later, closing the door behind him. The room filled with tension instantly. So what now? JUNGKOOK asked. We bleed on camera and everything goes back to normal. There is no normal, Taehyung replied. Then what? JUNGKOOK's voice rose. Do we keep destroying each other in public? Taehyung stepped closer. I want to know if you ever meant it. Don't, JUNGKOOK warned. No, Taehyung said firmly. You said you loved me, so why did you let me believe I was replaceable? JUNGKOOK's voice dropped. Because I didn't believe I was worth fighting for. The words hit harder than any accusation. Taehyung's anger dissolved into something raw and helpless. If I had known that, he said softly, I would have held you tighter. JUNGKOOK looked away. You always show up after the damage is done. Then let me show up now, Taehyung said. I don't believe you, JUNGKOOK replied. Then test me. JUNGKOOK turned back, eyes blazing. Fine, here's the truth. You humiliated me. You shattered the last piece of dignity I had. Taehyung didn't deny it. I know. And I'm not ready to forgive you, JUNGKOOK continued. You don't get forgiveness just because you're hurting. Taehyung swallowed hard. Then what do I get? The truth, JUNGKOOK said. And the truth is I loved you, but you also became the person I was most afraid of. The silence that followed wasn't sharp. It was heavy, sad, final in a way neither of them wanted to admit. JUNGKOOK moved toward the door, his hand lingering on the handle. Don't reach out to me tonight. Taehyung nodded. I won't. JUNGKOOK paused, then left. The silence after the interview didn't fade. It multiplied. By morning, it had infected everything. Headlines flooded every screen. Clips from the broadcast replayed on loop, dissected frame by frame, slowed down, zoomed in, turned into proof for arguments no one inside the room had agreed to make. Some praised their honesty. Others called it reckless, manipulative, unforgivable. Think pieces appeared overnight. Fan wars reignited with new fuel. Sponsors issued carefully worded statements. Meetings were scheduled, canceled, rescheduled again. Inside Taehyung's apartment, none of it felt real. He hadn't slept. He sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, phone face down on the table as if it might explode if he touched it. The quiet pressed in, louder than any crowd. JUNGKOOK's voice replayed in his head, not the anger, not the accusations, but the exhaustion beneath it. I'm not ready to forgive you. Taehyung rubbed his face and stood, packing the length of the room. Every instinct screamed to reach out, to say something, anything, but he'd promised, and for once he was trying not to take something JUNGKOOK asked for and turn it into another wound. Across the city, JUNGKOOK sat alone in a hotel room he hadn't chosen. Security insisted, privacy concerns, risk management. The curtains were drawn tight, the city reduced to a dull glow at the edges. His phone buzzed constantly on the bedside table, unread messages stacking into an overwhelming blur. He ignored them all. The mirror across the room reflected a version of him he barely recognized. Pale, tired, exposed. He pressed his palms against the sink and leaned forward, breathing slowly, grounding himself the way he'd learned to do when everything threatened to spiral. You collapsed, a voice in his head whispered. On live television, you broke in front of everyone. He closed his eyes. The fall replayed again, not as an image but as a feeling. The moment his body gave out, the helplessness, the certainty that he'd lost control in the worst possible place. A knock came at the door. JUNGKOOK flinched, heart jumping, then forced himself upright. "Who is it?" "It's Namjoon." He hesitated, then opened the door. Namjoon stepped inside, closing it gently behind him. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. He glanced around the room once before meeting JUNGKOOK's eyes. "How are you holding up?" he asked. JUNGKOOK gave a humorless laugh. "I'm functioning." "That's not what I asked." JUNGKOOK looked away. "I don't know how to exist today without feeling like everyone owns a piece of what happened." Namjoon nodded slowly. "They're trying to, the label's panicking, PR wants statements, lawyers want distance, everyone wants something from you." "And what do you want?" JUNGKOOK asked quietly. Namjoon didn't answer right away. "I want you to be okay, even if that's inconvenient." JUNGKOOK swallowed. "I don't think I can be okay here." Namjoon's gaze sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I need to leave," JUNGKOOK said. "Not for work, not for headlines, just leave." Silence fell between them. "You can't disappear again," Namjoon said carefully. "You know how that ends." "I know," JUNGKOOK replied. "That's why I'm telling you." Namjoon exhaled slowly. "Where would you go?" "I don't know yet," JUNGKOOK said. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere I can remember who I am when no one's watching." Namjoon studied him for a long moment. "And Taehyung?" JUNGKOOK's jaw tightened. "He doesn't get to be part of that decision." Namjoon didn't argue. He only nodded. "If you do this, the world will assume the worst." "They already do," JUNGKOOK said. By the afternoon, the rumors began. Anonymous sources whispered about hiatuses, about fractures that couldn't be repaired, about irreparable damage. The story evolved faster than the truth could keep up. Taehyung learned about JUNGKOOK's plans the same way everyone else did. From his phone, he stared at the message Namjoon sent, the words blurring together until they stopped making sense. "He's thinking about leaving tonight." Taehyung stood so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. His chest tightened, breath coming shallow and sharp. "Leaving. Again." The word hit him like a bruise he hadn't realized was still there. He typed, deleted, typed again. "Where?" No reply. Minutes dragged. The city outside his window moved on, indifferent. Cars passed. People laughed somewhere below. The world continued while something inside him threatened to crack open. Another message finally came. "Airport, no press." He didn't tell anyone else. Taehyung didn't think. He grabbed his jacket and keys, heart pounding as he moved. The promise he'd made echoed in his head. "Don't reach out to me tonight." He wasn't reaching out. He was going after him. The airport was chaos wrapped in routine. Announcements echoed overhead. Rolling suitcases clicked against tile. Taehyung scanned every face, adrenaline sharpening his focus. He spotted security first, then the familiar posture he knew too well, even wrapped in anonymity. Gray hoodie, mask pulled low, sunglasses hiding eyes that had cried too much lately. "JUNGKOOK." Taehyung broke into a run. "JUNGKOOK." The name cut through the noise. JUNGKOOK froze mid-step, fingers tightening around the handle of his suitcase. Slowly, he turned. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the space between them filled with everything they hadn't resolved. "You came," JUNGKOOK said quietly. "I had to," Taehyung replied, breathless. "You were going to disappear again." "I told you not to reach out." "I didn't," Taehyung said. "I showed up." JUNGKOOK laughed softly without humor. "You always do, at the edge." Taehyung stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to tell you something I should have said before the cameras, before the anger." JUNGKOOK hesitated, then nodded once. "I was jealous," Taehyung said, "of your strength, of your ability to walk away. I turned that jealousy into cruelty because I didn't know what else to do with it. Jungkook's shoulders sagged slightly. I don't need forgiveness, Taehyung continued. I just need you to know I never wanted to make you feel small. I wanted you to look at me again, and I chose the worst way possible. Jungkook's voice trembled. You humiliated me. I know, Taehyung said, and I'll carry that. Silence stretched between them as a boarding announcement echoed overhead. I'm tired, Jungkook whispered. I don't know who I am when everything about me is public. Then go, Taehyung said softly. Go find that person. Just don't vanish like you don't matter. Jungkook looked at him, eyes glassy behind the lenses. And you? I'll still be here, Taehyung said. Not chasing, not demanding, just here. For a long moment, Jungkook didn't move. Then he reached up and removed his sunglasses. His eyes were red, honest, unguarded. I don't know what we are, he said. Neither do I, Taehyung replied. But I know what we were wasn't nothing. Jungkook nodded slowly. He took a step back, then another, hands still wrapped around the suitcase handle. Don't follow me this time, he said. Taehyung didn't. Jungkook turned and walked towards security, disappearing into the crowd. Taehyung stood there long after, watching the space where he'd been swallowed by movement and noise, wondering whether letting someone go was an act of love or just another kind of loss. And somewhere between departure gates and unanswered questions, both of them understood the same terrifying truth. This wasn't over. The plane took off without ceremony. No press photos, no farewell posts, no dramatic announcement to frame the moment. Just a quiet ascent into the night sky, carrying Jungkook away from a city that had taken too much from him and given too little back. Taehyung watched the departure board until the status changed from boarding to departed. Only then did he leave the airport. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of noise and absence. Jungkook's silence became the loudest thing in the industry. No sightings, no updates, no accidental leaks. The lack of information created its own storm. Every empty space was filled with speculation, every pause treated like a statement. Taehyung returned to schedules he barely remembered agreeing to. Interviews, fittings, meetings where people spoke at him instead of to him. He answered questions with rehearsed calm, but something in his eyes had shifted. Fans noticed. Cameras caught it. The narrative adjusted itself accordingly. Kim Taehyung appears distracted. Sources say tensions remain unresolved. Is reconciliation impossible? He stopped reading after the third headline. At night his apartment felt too large, too quiet. He lay awake replaying moments he wished he could rewrite, not the fight, not the collapse, the smaller things, the times he could have listened instead of assuming, the nights he chose pride over patience. Across an ocean, Jungkook woke to unfamiliar light filtering through sheer curtains. The room was simple, neutral, intentionally temporary. He sat on the edge of the bed, feet pressed into cold tile, grounding himself in the present. No cameras. No schedule. No expectations. For the first time in years, his phone stayed silent because he wanted it to, not because he was afraid to look. He started small, long walks, quiet cafes where no one recognized him, a notebook filled with thoughts he never planned to share. He slept more, ate better, breathed deeper. And yet Taehyung followed him everywhere. Not physically, emotionally. In the music playing softly in the background of a store. In the way certain words landed too close to home. In the instinct to turn and comment on something, only to remember there was no one beside him anymore. One evening, Jungkook sat on a balcony overlooking a city that didn't know his name. He stared at the horizon, fingers tapping absently against the railing. He pulled out his phone. Scrolled. Stopped. Taehyung's name hovered there, untouched. He didn't press it. Instead, he opened his notebook and wrote a single sentence. I'm learning how to exist without being watched. Back in Seoul, Taehyung stood in a recording booth, headphones pressed tight against his ears. The track playing was unfinished, raw. The producer's voice crackled through the speakers, asking if he wanted to adjust the lyrics. No, Taehyung said quietly, leave it. The words weren't meant for charts. They weren't meant for anyone else at all. They were confessions layered into melody, pain softened just enough to survive being heard. When the session ended, he stayed behind alone, lights dimmed, the echo of his own voice lingering in the air. He wondered if JUNGKOOK would ever hear it. Weeks passed. The public slowly shifted focus as it always did. New scandals replaced old ones. The outrage dulled, but the absence remained. JUNGKOOK's continued silence turned from shock to concern to uneasy acceptance. Taehyung learned how to carry that absence without letting it consume him. Some days he succeeded, some days he didn't. Healing, he realized, wasn't linear. It was repetition, choice, restraint. One night, as rain traced quiet patterns against his window, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He almost ignored it. Almost. The message was short. I'm okay. I hope you are too. No name, no explanation. Taehyung's breath caught. His fingers hovered over the screen, heart pounding in a way it hadn't in weeks. He typed carefully. I'm glad you're safe. Take all the time you need. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No reply came. But something shifted anyway. Across the ocean, JUNGKOOK closed his phone and leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. The weight on his chest eased just a fraction. Not gone, not healed, but acknowledged. For the first time since the night everything shattered, there was no anger in the silence. Only space. And in that space, something fragile but real began to form. Not forgiveness, not reunion. Possibility. Because sometimes, love doesn't survive by holding on. Sometimes, it survives by letting go just enough to breathe. Time did what neither of them could. It softened the sharpest edges without erasing what had happened. Months passed, measured not by headlines but by distance. JUNGKOOK stayed out of sight, resisting every quiet pressure to reappear before he was ready. The world speculated less now, though it never truly stopped. His absence became a background hum rather than a breaking alarm. Taehyung, meanwhile, learned a different kind of patience. He stopped waiting for messages that might never come, stopped scanning crowds out of habit. Instead, he focused on what was directly in front of him. Work that demanded presence, conversations that required honesty, silence that no longer felt like punishment. Still, some nights were harder than others. On one such night, Taehyung sat alone in a hotel room overseas, city lights stretching endlessly beyond the window. A schedule lay untouched on the desk. He picked up his phone, not to reach out, but to scroll through old photos he'd never deleted. There they were, candid moments, blurry laughter, a hand on a shoulder, unnoticed at the time but unmistakable now. He locked the screen and exhaled slowly. This is what moving on feels like, he murmured, missing someone without chasing them. Across the ocean, JUNGKOOK stood in a small rehearsal space with scuffed floors and mirrors that didn't flatter. He wasn't there as an idol. No staff hovered nearby. No cameras documented the process. He was just another body in motion, rediscovering the simple language of movement and sound. Music filled the room, raw and unfinished. He sang quietly at first, voice testing its own strength, then louder, emotion threading through every note. Not for perfection, for truth. When the last chord faded, he rested his hands on his knees, breathing hard but steady. For the first time in a long while, he felt present. Later that night, JUNGKOOK sat at a desk, laptop open, cursor blinking on a blank document. He typed a few words, deleted them, tried again. Not a statement. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just a letter he never planned to send. I'm learning how to forgive myself. I think that's the part I skipped before. He closed the laptop without saving. Back in Seoul, Taehyung attended an industry event he couldn't decline. The room buzzed with polite conversations and careful smiles. Someone asked about JUNGKOOK. The question was casual, almost careless. Taehyung didn't flinch. "He's taking care of himself," he said simply. "That matters." No drama, no bitterness. The answer traveled fast. Fans noticed. So did reporters. The narrative shifted again, quieter this time, less accusatory, more human. Later, alone in the car, Taehyung allowed himself a small, tired smile. He hadn't defended. He hadn't deflected. He told the truth. Another month passed. Then, without warning, JUNGKOOK returned. Not with a splash, not with a dramatic reveal, just a single post uploaded without commentary. A black and white photo of an empty stage, lights dimmed, microphone resting at center. The caption read, "I'm still here." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Support flooded in. Relief, emotion, gratitude. The world welcomed him back not as something owned, but as someone who had survived. Taehyung saw the post late that night. He didn't like it. He didn't comment. He simply set his phone down and stared out the window, chest tightening with a mix of pride and restraint. This wasn't his moment to step into. It belonged to JUNGKOOK alone. 2 weeks later, fate intervened quietly. A private charity event, minimal press, a shared guest list neither of them had reviewed closely enough. Taehyung felt it before he saw him. That familiar shift in the air, the awareness that didn't need confirmation. He turned. JUNGKOOK stood across the room, dressed simply, posture calm but alert. Their eyes met. No cameras flashed. No crowd parted dramatically. Just two people, finally steady enough to stand in the same space again. They didn't rush toward each other. They didn't retreat. They closed the distance slowly, cautiously, like men who had learned the cost of moving too fast. "Hi," JUNGKOOK said. "Hi," Taehyung replied. No accusations. No apologies. No grand declarations. Just presence. They stood side by side, not touching, not avoiding it either. "I heard your song," JUNGKOOK said quietly. Taehyung's breath caught. "I didn't write it for anyone." "I know," JUNGKOOK replied. "That's why it mattered." Silence settled comfortably between them, no longer heavy. "I'm not ready for answers," JUNGKOOK said after a moment. "I'm not asking," Taehyung said. JUNGKOOK nodded once. "Good." They stayed like that for a while, surrounded by people, yet strangely alone in their shared understanding. This wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't closure. It was something far more fragile and far more powerful. A beginning that didn't demand an ending.